Violet Nolan stood in the small wooden church at the edge of Carlin, Nevada, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows, and realized with devastating clarity that Thomas Hartwell was not coming. Her hands trembled as they clutched the bouquet of wildflowers she had picked that morning, their petals already wilting in the August heat of 1882. The pews were packed with townsfolk who had come to witness what should have been the happiest day of her 22 years. But the whispers had started 20 minutes ago when the clock struck 2, and there was no sign of the groom. Violet's mother, Martha, sat in the front pew with tears streaming down her weathered face, while her father, Henry, paced near the door, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping even from where she stood. The Reverend, an elderly man named Samuel Winters, kept clearing his throat and adjusting his spectacles, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Violet felt the weight of every eye upon her, felt the pity radiating from the crowd like heat from a stove. "Perhaps we should wait a bit longer," Reverend Winters suggested gently, but his eyes held no real hope. Violet opened her mouth to agree, to cling to that last shred of possibility, when the church doors burst open with a bang that made everyone jump. For one wild, desperate moment, her heart leaped, thinking Thomas had finally arrived. Instead, a young man she had never seen before stumbled in, clearly having been leaning against the doors. He was covered in trail dust, his dark hair falling across his forehead, and he wore the weathered clothes of someone who spent his life on horseback. "Pardon me," he said, straightening up and removing his hat. His voice was deep and carried a slight drawl that spoke of somewhere farther south, maybe Texas. "I was just resting a moment and did not mean to intrude." "This is a private ceremony," Henry Nolan said sharply, moving toward the stranger. The cowboy's eyes swept the scene quickly, taking in Violet in her simple cream-colored dress that she had sewn herself, the empty space where a groom should be, and the uncomfortable tension that filled the small church like smoke. His expression shifted from embarrassment to understanding, and then to something that looked remarkably like anger. "Begging your pardon again, but it looks to me like someone's made a fool decision," he said, his gaze settling on Violet with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What kind of man leaves a woman like that standing at the altar?" "That is none of your concern, stranger," Henry replied, but there was less heat in his voice now. The cowboy's words had voiced what everyone was thinking. Violet felt something crack inside her chest. The truth crashed over her like a bucket of cold water. Thomas was not coming. He had abandoned her, humiliated her in front of the entire town. She would be the subject of gossip and pity for years to come. No other man would want to court her after this spectacle. Her life in Carlin, already limited by the harsh realities of life in a small Nevada mining town, had just become impossibly smaller. "You are right," she heard herself say, her voice surprisingly steady. "It is not your concern, sir. Reverend Winters, I believe we can all go home now." "Now, Violet," her mother began, rising from her seat. "I am not waiting any longer," Violet said firmly. She had spent 6 months planning this wedding, had accepted Thomas's proposal with genuine affection if not passionate love, had believed he was a good man who would provide for her and treat her kindly. She had been wrong about all of it. The stranger was still standing in the doorway, and now he stepped fully inside, letting the doors close behind him. "Madam, I do not mean to overstep, but I have been riding for 3 days straight, and I clearly just stumbled into something significant. My name is Nathan Cross, and I am heading north to Wyoming to start work on a ranch up there." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "From where I am standing, you have got a church full of people, a reverend ready to perform a marriage and a situation that needs addressing. Violet stared at him, not understanding what he was suggesting. He was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 25, with eyes that were a striking shade of gray-blue and a face that was honest and open despite the dust and obvious exhaustion. "What are you proposing, young man?" Reverend Winters asked, his voice curious. Nathan Cross turned his hat in his hands, and Violet saw that despite his bold words, he was nervous. "I am proposing that if the lady is willing, I would stand up there with her and say those vows instead. I know it sounds crazy, and I am just a drifter passing through, but it seems to me that no woman should have to suffer this kind of shame through no fault of her own." The church erupted in shocked murmurs. Violet felt dizzy, as if the floor had tilted beneath her feet. This complete stranger was offering to marry her to save her from humiliation. It was insane. It was impossible. It was the most surprising thing anyone had ever done for her. "Absolutely not," Henry Nolan declared. "I will not have my daughter married off to some cowboy we do not know anything about. You were willing to marry her off to a man who did not even bother to show up," Nathan pointed out, and though his tone was respectful, there was steel underneath it. "At least I am here." Violet found her voice. "Why would you do such a thing? You do not know me, you do not owe me anything." Nathan met her eyes directly. "You are right on both counts, madam, but I know what it is like to be at the mercy of other people's choices, and I know what it is like to feel powerless. If I can do something about that for you, well, seems like the decent thing to do. I am not a rich man, but I am honest. I've got a job waiting for me in Wyoming that includes a small house. I do not drink to excess, I do not gamble, and I have never raised my hand to a woman or child. I cannot promise you love, but I can promise you respect and partnership." The church had gone completely silent. Violet looked at her mother, who was clutching her handkerchief with white knuckles. She looked at her father, whose face had gone red with a mixture of anger and confusion. She looked at Reverend Winters, who appeared utterly bewildered by the turn of events. Then she looked back at Nathan Cross, this stranger who had walked into the worst moment of her life and offered her a way out. "Could I speak with you outside for a moment?" Violet asked. Nathan nodded and held the door open for her. As she passed through it, she heard the immediate explosion of voices behind her, everyone talking at once. The afternoon sun was blindingly bright after the dimness of the church, and the heat wrapped around her like a blanket. Nathan followed her down the steps and a short distance away, giving her space. "This is absolutely mad," Violet said, turning to face him. "Yes, madam, it is," he agreed. "You are truly willing to marry a complete stranger just to save her reputation." "I am truly willing to marry a woman who has been wronged and deserves better," Nathan said. "Though I will admit, I am not entirely selfless in this. I have been alone for a long time, and the prospect of having a partner in life appeals to me. But I want to be clear about something, Miss Nolan. If you say yes to this, I will honor those vows. I will not abandon you or mistreat you, but I also will not force anything upon you. You will have time to adjust to this arrangement, and what happens between us will be at your pace." Violet studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She had always prided herself on being a good judge of character, though Thomas had apparently proved her wrong. But there was something about Nathan Cross that felt fundamentally different. Maybe it was the directness of his gaze or the calm way he spoke, but she found herself believing him. "I do not love you," she said bluntly. "I do not love you either," he replied just as honestly. "But I have seen marriages built on less than mutual respect and shared goals. Maybe that is a better foundation than romance anyway." "You do not believe in love." Nathan looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening. "I believe in it. I just do not know that I am built for it anymore. Lost too much, seen too much. But I believe in keeping your word and treating people right. That has to count for something. Violet thought about her options. She could go back into that church and dismiss everyone, face the pitying looks and whispered conversations that would follow her everywhere she went in Carlin. She could watch as decent men avoided her because she was damaged goods, as mothers pulled their sons away from her. She could grow old in her parents' house, forever defined by this moment. Or she could take a leap of faith with a stranger who had shown her more kindness in 10 minutes than Thomas had shown in 6 months of courtship. If I say yes, we leave for Wyoming soon, she said slowly, working through the practicalities. I cannot stay in this town after today. We can leave tomorrow if you want, Nathan offered. Or we can stay for a bit while you say goodbye to your family properly. That choice is yours. What kind of work are you doing in Wyoming? I am going to work on the Drummond Ranch, about 30 miles north of Cheyenne. They need experienced cattlemen, and I spent the last 5 years working ranches in Texas before my family's situation changed. The foreman there, Jack Drummond, promised me a fair wage and a small house on the property. It is not much, but it is a start. And you would share this house with me. A woman you just met? Yes, madam. Though like I said, you will have your space and your time. I am not expecting anything other than the legal bond of marriage unless and until you decide otherwise. Violet took a deep breath. The logical part of her brain was screaming that this was reckless, that she should think it through, that she should wait. But the part of her that had been standing in that church, drowning in humiliation and lost futures, was screaming even louder. This was a chance, probably the only chance she would get, to escape the prison her life had just become. All right, she said, and watched Nathan's eyes widen slightly. I will marry you, Nathan Cross, but I have conditions. Name them. First, you meant what you said about not forcing yourself on me. I need time to adjust to all of this. You have my word on that. Second, if either of us finds this arrangement truly unbearable, we discuss it honestly. I will not be trapped in a miserable marriage. Nathan hesitated on that one, and she saw conflict flash across his face. I meant what I said about honoring vows. Divorce is not something I take lightly. I am not talking about running away at the first difficulty, Violet clarified. But if months or years down the line, we find we truly cannot stand each other, I want your word that we will talk about it like reasonable adults rather than letting resentment poison us both. That is fair, Nathan agreed. What else? Third, I want to write to my family, and I want you to give me the means to travel back here if there is an emergency. Of course. Anything else? Violet thought for a moment. Just one more thing. Tell me why you are really doing this. The truth. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. I told you I lost people. My whole family, actually. Fever took my parents and my 2 younger sisters 3 years ago. I have been drifting since then, sending money to pay off their debts, not really settling anywhere. When I walked into that church and saw you standing there, alone and hurting, I just thought maybe we could both use someone on our side. Someone to build something new with. I am tired of being alone, Miss Nolan. I am tired of having no one who cares if I come home safe or not. Maybe that is selfish, but it is the truth. The raw honesty in his voice made Violet's throat tight. She understood that feeling of being adrift more than he could know. Even before today, she had sometimes felt like she was just going through the motions, waiting for her real life to start. Call me Violet, she said softly. If we are going to be married, you should use my given name. A slow smile spread across Nathan's face, transforming it from merely honest to genuinely handsome. Violet, that is a pretty name. Shall we go tell everyone then? Nathan offered her his arm. Let us do this proper. When they walked back into the church together, the murmuring stopped instantly. Violet's father stood up, his face stern. "Violet Marie Nolan, you cannot be seriously considering this." "I am not considering it, Papa, I have decided. Mr. Cross has made me a fair offer and I am accepting it. I would like your blessing, but I will do this regardless." Martha Nolan let out a small sob, but when Violet looked at her mother, she saw not just sorrow but also understanding in her eyes. Martha had been 19 when she married Henry, moving from Missouri to this harsh Nevada desert with a man she barely knew. She understood what it meant to take a leap of faith. "Henry," Martha said quietly, "let her choose her own path." "We do not know anything about this man," Henry protested, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. "We thought we knew Thomas Hartwell," Violet said, "and look how that turned out." Reverend Winters stepped forward. "I have to say, in all my years of performing marriages, I have never encountered a situation quite like this. But Miss Nolan, if you are certain this is what you want, I will proceed. Mr. Cross, are you absolutely sure you understand what you are committing to?" "Yes, sir," Nathan said firmly. "I am ready to take these vows and mean them." The Reverend looked between them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Let us begin. Everyone please take your seats." The guests settled back into the pews with a buzz of excited whispers. This would be the talk of the town for months, Violet knew, but at least now the story would have a different ending. Instead of being the pitiable girl left at the altar, she would be the bold woman who married a mysterious cowboy. It was not the story she had imagined for herself, but it was hers to write. Nathan stood beside her at the altar, still covered in trail dust, still smelling of horse and leather and open sky. Violet's hands were no longer trembling. When Reverend Winters began the ceremony, she listened to the words with fresh ears, hearing their weight and promise. Nathan repeated his vows in a clear, steady voice, never once looking away from her face. When it was her turn, Violet spoke just as firmly, committing herself to this stranger and this unknown future. "You have a ring?" the Reverend asked Nathan. Nathan's face fell slightly. "No, sir, I did not exactly plan for this." "Use mine," came a voice from the pews. Violet's grandmother, Eleanor, who was 80 years old and rarely spoke up, shuffled forward. She pulled a simple gold band from her wrinkled finger. "My Henry gave this to me 57 years ago. He was a good man who kept his word. Something tells me you are cut from similar cloth, young man." "I cannot take your wedding ring," Nathan protested. "You can and you will," Eleanor said firmly. "What good does it do me? My Henry is gone and I will be joining him soon enough. Let this ring start a new story." Nathan took the ring with obvious reverence, his throat working as he swallowed hard. "Thank you, madam. I will treasure this and the trust you are placing in me." He slipped the ring onto Violet's finger and it fit perfectly, still warm from Eleanor's hand. Violet stared down at it, overwhelmed by the strangeness and significance of the moment. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Winters declared. "Mr. Cross, you may kiss your bride." Nathan looked at Violet with a question in his eyes, checking for permission. She gave a tiny nod and he leaned in, pressing his lips to hers gently and briefly. It was chaste and respectful, nothing like the passionate kisses she had sometimes imagined with Thomas. But it was also real and honest, which counted for something. When they turned to face the congregation, there was a smattering of applause, though most people still looked shocked. Violet's mother was openly crying now, and her father looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour. Violet walked down the aisle on Nathan's arm, her life irrevocably changed from what it had been when she walked up it. Outside the church, neighbors came up to offer awkward congratulations. Some of the women hugged Violet, whispering encouragement or concerns in her ear. The men shook Nathan's hand warily, sizing him up. Through it all, Violet felt like she was watching from outside her own body, barely able to process what had just happened. "I suppose we should talk about the practical matters," Nathan said once they had a moment of relative privacy. "Do you need time to pack your belongings?" "Yes, and I should spend tonight with my parents. We can leave in the morning if that suits you." "That is fine. I will find a place at the boarding house tonight and get my horse settled. Is there anything I should know about what you will need to bring?" Violet thought about her few possessions. "I do not have much. Clothes, some books, my sewing supplies. It should all fit in a trunk and a few bags." "I will arrange for a wagon then, something more comfortable than riding horseback for the journey. It will take us about a week to reach Wyoming, maybe a bit less if the weather holds." "A week alone on the trail together," Violet said, the reality of it sinking in. She would be alone with this man she had just married, camping under the stars, completely dependent on him. "We will take the main routes and stay at towns when we can," Nathan assured her, reading her nervousness. "I know this is all happening very fast." That might be the understatement of the century. Nathan's mouth quirked in an almost smile. "Fair enough." "Listen, Violet, I know you are probably scared and confused and may be regretting this already. But I meant every word I said in there. I will take care of you and treat you with respect. You have my word on that." "I am holding you to it," Violet said, and she meant it. Her parents' house was small and cramped, made of rough wood that had weathered to gray in the harsh Nevada sun. That evening, as Violet packed her trunk, her mother sat on the bed watching with red-rimmed eyes. "I do not know if I should be furious with you or proud of you," Martha said quietly. "Can it be both?" Violet asked, folding a dress carefully. "Are you sure about this? Truly sure? It is not too late to change your mind." Violet sat down beside her mother. "What is the alternative, Mama? Stay here and face everyone's pity? Wait for some man desperate enough to overlook being second choice? I am 22 years old, and today I realized that my entire life could be defined by something someone else did to me. At least this way, I am making my own choice." Martha reached out and took Violet's hand. "When I married your father, I barely knew him. My parents arranged the match and I was terrified. But Henry turned out to be a good man and we built a life together. It was not always easy, but we made it work. I suppose what I am trying to say is that love can grow from the strangest beginnings." "Did you love Papa right away?" "No," Martha admitted. "But I grew to love him deeply. Give this boy a chance, Violet. I know he is a stranger, but he did something extraordinary today. That speaks to his character." "He lost his whole family," Violet said softly, repeating what Nathan had told her. "I think he is as alone in this world as I felt standing in that church." "Then maybe you can help each other," Martha said. "That is not such a bad foundation for a marriage." Violet's father came in later after she had finished packing. He stood in the doorway awkwardly, clearly struggling with what to say. "Papa," Violet began, but he held up a hand. "I am not going to pretend I am happy about this. I am not. I wanted better for you than riding off with some cowboy we know nothing about. But your mother tells me I need to trust your judgment, and she is usually right about these things. So I am giving you this." He held out a small leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. "It is not much, but it is what I have saved. Keep it hidden. If things go wrong, if he turns out to be not what he seems, you use this money to come home. Do you understand me?" Violet took the pouch, tears blurring her vision. "Thank you, Papa. And you tell that Nathan Cross that if he hurts my daughter, I will track him down and make him answer for it." "I will tell him," Violet promised, though she doubted Nathan would ever give her cause to make good on that threat. For all his strangeness, She believed he was genuine. That night, Violet lay in her small bed for the last time, staring at the ceiling and wondering what her new life would be like. She thought about Wyoming, which she had never seen. She thought about the ranch where Nathan would work and the small house they would share. She thought about Nathan himself, this quiet man who had walked into her life at the exact moment she needed someone to. Was it fate? Divine intervention? Pure chance? She did not know, but she was grateful for it nonetheless. Morning came too quickly. Violet dressed in her most practical traveling outfit and said goodbye to the house she had grown up in. The town was just waking up as Nathan arrived with a small covered wagon pulled by two sturdy horses. He looked better rested than he had yesterday, though still somewhat uncomfortable in his role as sudden husband. "Good morning," he greeted her, removing his hat. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough," Violet said, though it was a lie. "This is everything." She gestured to her trunk and bags. Nathan loaded her belongings with easy strength, securing them in the wagon bed. Violet's parents came out to say their final goodbyes. Martha hugged her tightly and whispered prayers for her safety. Henry shook Nathan's hand with obvious reluctance. "You take care of her," he said gruffly. "I will, sir. You have my word." Violet climbed up onto the wagon seat, her hands folding in her lap. This was it. She was leaving Carlin, leaving the only life she had ever known with a man she had met less than 24 hours ago. It should have been terrifying. In many ways it was. But it was also exhilarating, like standing on the edge of a cliff and choosing to jump. Nathan settled beside her and took up the reins. "Ready, as I will ever be." The wagon rolled forward, and Violet turned to wave at her parents, watching them grow smaller behind her. The town of Carlin passed by slowly, familiar buildings and faces. She saw Mrs. Henderson sweeping her porch and stopping to stare. She saw the mercantile where she had worked part-time and the schoolhouse where she had attended classes as a girl. All of it was part of her past now. "Do you regret it?" Nathan asked quietly once they were clear of town, heading north on the dusty trail. Violet considered the question honestly. "Ask me again in a month." "Fair enough." They traveled in silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. The Nevada landscape stretched out around them, all sagebrush and rocky hills under an endless sky. It was harsh country, beautiful in its own way but unforgiving. "Tell me about yourself," Nathan said eventually. "If we are going to be spending a week on this trail together, we should probably get to know each other." "What do you want to know?" "Anything. Everything. What do you like to do? What are you good at? What makes you happy?" Violet thought about it. "I like to read, though I have not had access to many books. I am good at sewing and mending. I can cook, though I am better at practical meals than fancy ones. I like the early morning before the heat of the day sets in. I like thunderstorms. What about you?" "I like horses more than most people," Nathan admitted. "I like the work of a ranch, the rhythm of it. I am good with my hands, fixing things and building. I like coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. I like the idea of having a home again, even though I have not had one in years." "Why did you leave Texas?" Nathan's face grew shadowed. "After my family died, I could not stay there. Everything reminded me of them. The house we had lived in, the town where they were buried, all of it was just ghosts and grief. So I started drifting, working ranches from Texas up through Colorado, sending money back to pay off the debts my father left. Last month, I finally paid the last of it, and I realized I was free to go anywhere, do anything. That is when I heard about the job in Wyoming." "I am sorry about your family," Violet said softly. "That must have been unbearable." "It was the worst thing I have ever been through," Nathan said simply. "But you either keep living or you do not. I chose to keep living, even though some days that choice is harder than others." Violet was quiet, processing this. She had known loss, her grandparents and a younger brother who had died as a baby, but she had never experienced the kind of wholesale devastation Nathan was describing. It explained the sadness she sometimes glimpsed behind his eyes, the sense that he was older than his years. "Was Thomas Hartwell your first love?" Nathan asked. "No," Violet said honestly. "I cared for him and I thought he would be a good husband, but I was not in love with him. Maybe that is why it was easier to make the choice I did yesterday. If I had been deeply in love, I do not think I could have just moved on like that." "Did you ever have a first love?" "Yes," Violet said quietly. "When I was 18. His name was David, and he was passing through Carlin with his family. We had a summer together and I thought he would stay, but his family moved on to California. He wrote me a few letters, then stopped. I learned later he had married someone else. I am sorry. It taught me a valuable lesson about men who make promises," Violet said with a trace of bitterness. "Although apparently I did not learn it well enough given Thomas." "Not all men are like that," Nathan said. "How do I know you are not?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "I suppose you do not. Not really. I suppose trust is something I will have to earn over time, but I can tell you that when I make a promise, I keep it. Always have. It is one of the few things I am truly proud of about myself." They stopped for lunch beside a creek, letting the horses drink while they ate the food Martha had packed for them. Violet felt awkward, uncertain how to act around this man who was legally her husband but still felt like a stranger. Nathan seemed to sense her discomfort and gave her space, not pushing for conversation or closeness. As the days passed, and they made their way north through Nevada and into Idaho, a tentative friendship began to form between them. Nathan told her stories about the ranches he had worked on and the characters he had met along the way. Violet told him about growing up in Carlin, about the harsh winters and brutal summers, about the mines that had drawn people to the area, and the struggles of life in such an isolated place. They stayed in small towns when they could, Nathan always securing separate rooms at boarding houses, making good on his promise to give her time and space. When they camped, he set up 2 separate bedrolls far enough apart to be proper. He was unfailingly courteous, helping her down from the wagon, making sure she had enough to eat, asking after her comfort. "You are being very chivalrous," Violet observed on the 4th night as they sat by their campfire under a sky full of stars. "That is how my mother raised me," Nathan said. "She used to say that how a man treats a woman says everything about his character." She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. She was also stubborn as a mule and had a temper that could peel paint, but she loved fiercely. My father adored her. Even when they were arguing, you could see how much they loved each other. "That must have been nice to grow up with," Violet said. Her parents loved each other, but their affection was quieter, more practical. It was. It set a high bar for what a marriage should be. "Are we a marriage?" Violet asked suddenly. "I mean, really. We have the legal document and we said the vows, but we are living like polite strangers." Nathan poked at the fire with a stick, his face thoughtful. "I think we are a marriage in potential. We have planted the seed, and now we have to see if it grows into something real." "That is a surprisingly poetic way of putting it." "I read books too, you know," Nathan said with a hint of a smile. "Just because I am a cowboy does not mean I am uneducated." "I did not mean to imply that," Violet said quickly. "I know. I am just giving you trouble." It was the first time he had teased her, and Violet found herself smiling. Maybe they could do this. Maybe they could build something from this strange beginning. On the 6th day, they crossed into Wyoming. The landscape changed, becoming more varied with rolling hills and distant mountains. Nathan grew more animated as they got closer to their destination, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the area. Drummond Ranch is about 2 more days from here, he said. It is good country for cattle, lots of open range. Jack Drummond is a fair man from what I understand. He came out here about 10 years ago and built up the operation from nothing. How many people work there? About 20 hands during the busy season, fewer in winter. There are a few families living on the property too. You will have other women to talk to, which I thought might be important. Violet appreciated that he had considered her need for female companionship. What about supplies? How far are we from town? About 15 miles to the nearest settlement, a place called Riverside. It is not much, but it has a general store and a post office. We will go in once a month or so for supplies and mail. This is very isolated, Violet said, a flicker of nervousness running through her. It is, Nathan agreed. Will that be a problem? Violet thought about it. Carlin had been isolated too in its way, and at least here she would not have to face people who knew about her humiliation at the altar. No, she decided. I think it will be fine. They reached the Drummond Ranch late in the afternoon of the 8th day. Violet was exhausted from traveling, dusty and sore from the wagon seat, but she sat up straighter as they approached, wanting to make a good first impression. The ranch was larger than she had expected, with a main house, several barns, and a scattering of smaller buildings. Cattle grazed in the fields, hundreds of them, and she could see men working in the distance. A man came out of the main house as they pulled up, tall and weathered with a thick mustache. "Nathan Cross," he called out. "Yes, sir, Mr. Drummond," Nathan replied, hopping down from the wagon. "You are a week later than expected," Jack Drummond said, but his tone was not angry, just observational. "Yes, sir. I had some unexpected developments. I hope my being late has not caused problems. Nothing we could not handle, though I am curious about these developments." His eyes had moved to Violet, who was still sitting in the wagon. Nathan reached up to help Violet down. "This is my wife, Violet. We were married just before leaving Nevada." Jack Drummond's eyebrows rose. "Wife? You did not mention having a wife in your letters." "That is because I did not have one at the time. Like I said, unexpected developments." A woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 40, with warm brown eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. "Did I hear that right? You brought a wife? Well, welcome, dear." "I am Sarah Drummond. You must be exhausted from traveling. Come inside and have some coffee and something to eat." Violet felt overwhelmed by the welcome, by the kindness in Sarah's voice. "Thank you, Mrs. Drummond. That is very kind. Call me Sarah, please. We are not formal out here." "Jack, stop interrogating the poor boy and show him where they will be staying." Jack smiled at his wife with obvious affection. "Yes, dear. Nathan, your house is just over that rise there. It is small but sturdy. Come on, I will show you." Violet followed the men, with Sarah walking beside her and keeping up a steady stream of conversation. The house was indeed small, just 2 rooms really, but it was solidly built and had glass windows, which Violet knew was a luxury. There was a main room that served as kitchen and living space, and a separate bedroom. It was sparsely furnished with just the basics. "I know it is not much," Sarah said, "but we can help you make it more homey. I have some spare linens and dishes I can lend you until you get properly settled." "This is wonderful," Violet said honestly. It was more than she had hoped for, a real home of their own. Nathan brought in their belongings while Jack explained the work schedule and expectations. Violet stood in the middle of the small house, trying to picture their life here. This was where she would cook meals and sew by lamplight. This was where she and Nathan would learn to be married, whatever that ended up meaning. That night, After the Drummonds had left and they were alone for the first time in their new home, Nathan stood awkwardly in the doorway of the bedroom. "You take the bed," he said. "I will sleep out here on the floor." "Nathan, do not be ridiculous. The bed is big enough for both of us." "I know, but I meant what I said about giving you time." "We can share a bed without anything else happening," Violet said, her cheeks flushing. "We are adults." "I trust you to keep your word." Nathan looked uncertain but finally nodded. "All right, but if you change your mind, just say so." That night they lay on opposite sides of the bed, both fully clothed, careful not to touch. Violet stared at the ceiling, acutely aware of Nathan's breathing, of his presence beside her. This was her husband. This man who had been a complete stranger 9 days ago was now the person she would spend her life with. It was terrifying and strange and oddly comforting all at once. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what? For keeping your word, for being kind, for giving me a way out when I needed one." "You gave me something too," Nathan said quietly. "A reason to stop drifting and start building something real, so thank you too." Violet felt something shift in her chest, a warming toward this man who had shown her nothing but respect and consideration. She was not in love with him, but she was beginning to think she could be, given time. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Nathan worked long days on the ranch, leaving before dawn and returning exhausted at sunset. Violet threw herself into making the house a home, sewing curtains for the windows, planting a small vegetable garden, learning to cook on the temperamental wood stove. Sarah Drummond became a friend, teaching her the rhythms of ranch life and introducing her to the other women who lived on the property. There was Maria, a Mexican woman whose husband worked as one of the senior hands, who taught Violet how to make tortillas and laughed at her first clumsy attempts. There was Anne, a quiet woman about Violet's age whose husband had died in a riding accident the previous year, leaving her with a young son to raise. There was Ruth, an older widow who lived in a small cabin and served as the unofficial nurse and midwife for the ranch community. The women welcomed Violet without judgment, without prying too much into her past. Out here, where everyone was focused on survival and the hard work of daily life, her history mattered less than her willingness to contribute and be part of the community. Nathan and Violet continued to navigate their unusual marriage with careful politeness. They ate meals together, sharing their days. Nathan would tell her about the work he was doing, fixing fences or breaking horses or herding cattle. Violet would tell him about her garden or the sewing she was doing or the gossip she had learned from the other women. They were building a partnership, a friendship even, but there was still a careful distance between them. One evening about 6 weeks after their arrival, Nathan came home with blood on his shirt. Violet gasped when she saw him. "What happened?" "Just a cut from some wire. It is not serious." "Let me see," Violet insisted, and Nathan reluctantly removed his shirt. There was a long gash across his ribs, still bleeding sluggishly. "Sit down. I need to clean this." She heated water and gathered clean cloths, her hands surprisingly steady as she cleaned the wound. Nathan sat quietly, watching her face as she worked. When she looked up and met his eyes, she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not just gratitude, but something warmer. "You are taking good care of me," he said softly. "You are my husband, of course I am. Not all wives would, not in a marriage like ours." Violet sat back on her heels, still holding the wet cloth. "What is our marriage like, Nathan? We have been living together for almost 2 months now, and I still do not know how to define us." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "I think we are becoming real," he said finally. "Slow maybe, but real." "Do you want it to be real?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Do you?" Violet thought about the last 2 months, about how Nathan had been kind and patient and considerate, never pushing her but never pulling away either. She thought about the way he smiled when he came home and found her working in the garden, the way he always thanked her for meals, the way he had fixed the squeaky hinge on the door because he knew it annoyed her. She thought about how safe she felt with him, how comfortable. "Yes," she said. "I do." Something shifted between them in that moment, a door opening that had been closed. Nathan reached out and cupped her cheek gently. "Can I kiss you? Really kiss you, I mean?" Violet's heart was pounding, but she nodded. Nathan leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and when his lips met hers it was different from the chaste kiss in the church. This was deeper, warmer, full of promise and possibility. Violet felt heat bloom through her body, and when Nathan pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Nathan admitted. "Why did you not?" "Because I wanted to wait until you wanted it too, did you?" "Yes," Violet whispered. "I did." That night, for the first time, they fell asleep in each other's arms. It felt right in a way that Violet had not expected, natural and comfortable. She had been so focused on the strangeness of their situation that she had forgotten that sometimes the best relationships grew slowly, built on respect and friendship before anything else. As autumn arrived and the weather turned cooler, Violet realized she was happy. It surprised her, this quiet contentment. She had thought she would miss Carlin, miss her family and the familiar rhythms of her old life. But instead, she found herself embracing this new existence. She loved the vast Wyoming sky and the way the seasons changed the landscape. She loved the community of the ranch, the way everyone looked out for each other. And she was growing to love Nathan. It was not a passionate, sweeping love like she had read about in books. It was something quieter but perhaps more durable. It was the way he brought her wildflowers he found while riding the range. It was the way she made sure his favorite shirts were always clean and mended. It was the quiet conversations by lamplight and the comfortable silences during meals. It was the way they had learned to move around each other in their small house, choreographed by daily proximity. It was the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, with warmth and wonder, as if he could not quite believe his luck. One morning in October, Violet woke feeling nauseous. She barely made it outside before she was sick. Nathan was immediately worried, hovering anxiously as she straightened up. "Should I get Ruth? Are you ill?" Violet wiped her mouth and did some quick mental calculations. Her monthly courses had not come in almost 2 months, but she had attributed that to the stress of upheaval and travel. But combined with this morning sickness, there was really only one explanation. "I think I might be pregnant," she said. Nathan's eyes went wide. "Are you certain?" "Not entirely, but the signs are there. I will talk to Ruth today to be sure." Ruth confirmed Violet's suspicions that afternoon, examining her and declaring that she was indeed expecting, probably about 2 months along. "The baby should come in late spring," Ruth said. "Have you told Nathan yet?" "I told him I suspected. I wanted to be sure before we got too excited." "He is going to be over the moon," Ruth predicted. "That boy has been half in love with you since you arrived." Violet felt her cheeks warm. "You think so?" "Oh, honey, everyone can see it. The way he looks at you, the way he talks about you. You are his whole world." When Violet told Nathan the news for certain that evening, his face transformed with joy. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down again, worried he had been too rough. "We are going to have a baby," he said, as if he could not quite believe it. "I am going to be a father." "Are you happy about it?" Violet asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy, Violet, I am more than happy. I am terrified and thrilled and amazed all at once. We are going to be a family, a real family." He kissed her then, and it was full of promise and future. That night, their marriage became complete in every way. It was tender and sweet and a little awkward, both of them learning each other for the first time. But it felt right, the natural progression of everything that had been building between them for months. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Nathan traced patterns on her shoulder. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know I should have said it before now, but I did not want to scare you off. But I do, Violet. I love you." Violet felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too. I did not expect to, but I do." "When did you know?" Violet thought about it. "I think it was gradual. 100 small moments that added up to something bigger." "What about you? The day you cleaned my cut. The way you took care of me without making a fuss about it. The way you looked at me like I mattered. I think that was when I knew for sure, though I had been falling for a while before that." Winter came, and with it harsh weather that kept everyone close to home. Violet's pregnancy progressed, her belly growing round despite the morning sickness that plagued her first few months. Nathan was attentive and protective, sometimes comically so. He worried about her carrying heavy things, about her being out in the cold, about 100 small things that Violet found both annoying and endearing. The ranch community rallied around them. Maria gave Violet some of her children's outgrown baby clothes. Sarah helped her sew tiny gowns and blankets. Anne shared advice about dealing with pregnancy and childbirth. Even the ranch hands, rough men who worked hard and said little, would tip their hats to Violet and ask after her health. "You have been good for Nathan," Jack Drummond told her one afternoon when she was visiting Sarah. "When he first arrived, he was so closed off, like he did not want to let anyone in. But since you came, he has opened up. He is part of the community now, not just a hired hand passing through." "He has been good for me too," Violet said. "I was in a dark place when we met, and he gave me hope when I needed it most." "Sarah told me how you two came to be married. That was quite a thing Nathan did, stepping up like that. It was the best impulsive decision either of us ever made." As Violet's belly grew larger, she found herself thinking about her family in Nevada. She had written them regularly, describing her new life and assuring them that she was well and happy. Her mother wrote back with news from Carlin, carefully avoiding any mention of Thomas Hartwell. In her last letter, Violet had shared the news of the baby, and she wondered what her parents' reaction had been. The answer came in late February, when a package arrived with a letter from her mother. Inside were beautifully knitted baby clothes and a heartfelt note expressing joy at becoming a grandmother. There was also a shorter note from her father, gruff and to the point, but expressing hope that Violet was being well cared for and promising to visit when the baby was old enough to travel. "They are happy for us," Violet said, showing Nathan the letter. "Of course they are. You are their daughter and they love you. I am glad they are coming around to accepting our marriage. You think we will ever tell our child the whole story of how we met, how their parents got married?" Nathan smiled. "I think when the time is right, we will. It is a good story after all, strange but good. It shows that sometimes the best things come from unexpected places." Spring arrived with wildflowers covering the hills and newborn calves filling the pastures. Violet was huge now, uncomfortable and impatient for the baby to arrive. Ruth checked on her regularly, pronouncing her healthy and strong. Nathan had barely left her side during the last month, arranging to do work closer to the house so he could be nearby if she needed him. The baby came on a warm May evening, just as the sun was setting. The labor was long and difficult, but Ruth was there to guide Violet through it, with Sarah holding her hand and Nathan pacing anxiously outside. When the baby finally arrived, wailing lustily, Ruth cleaned him up and placed him in Violet's arms. "You have a son," she announced. Nathan was allowed in then, and he approached the bed with awe on his face. Can I hold him?" Violet passed him the tiny bundle, watching as Nathan gazed down at their son with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Violet asked. They had discussed names during the long winter months, but had not decided on anything definite. Now, looking at their son's tiny face, Violet knew what felt right. "What about Henry after my father? And maybe Michael for a middle name." "Henry Michael Cross," Nathan said, trying it out. "I like it. Hello, Henry. Welcome to the world, little man." Henry was a content baby, nursing well and sleeping in long stretches that left Violet better rested than she had expected. Nathan was a devoted father, helping with feedings and diaper changes without complaint. Violet would often wake in the night to find Nathan sitting by the cradle, just watching their son sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. "I never thought I would have this," he told her one night. "After I lost my family, I thought I was done with that kind of happiness. But then you came into my life, and now we have Henry, and I feel like the luckiest man alive." "We are both lucky," Violet said. "That day in the church when you walked in, you saved me, but I think maybe I saved you too. You absolutely did. You gave me a reason to stop running from the past and start building a future." As Henry grew from a tiny infant into a chubby baby, the little house filled with his laughter and cries. Violet discovered reserves of patience and love she had not known she possessed. Motherhood was exhausting and wonderful and consuming. Nathan continued to work hard on the ranch, but he always made time for his family, coming home to play with Henry and help Violet with the endless tasks of caring for an infant. The ranch community embraced Henry as they had embraced his parents. Maria's children loved playing with the baby, and Anne would often bring her son over for visits. Sarah spoiled Henry shamelessly, knitting him tiny sweaters and bringing over special treats. Jack would stop by occasionally to admire how the boy was growing, joking that they were raising a future ranch hand. When Henry was 6 months old, Violet's parents made the long journey from Nevada to meet their grandson. The reunion was emotional, with Martha crying and hugging Violet tightly. Henry, watching Martha with wide eyes, was trying to comprehend his world expanding. Violet took them to the small house with pride and showed them the life she had built. "You have done well for yourself," Henry Nolan said gruffly, shaking Nathan's hand. "I will admit I had my doubts about you, but I can see you have made my daughter happy." "That has always been my goal, sir," Nathan replied. "She looks happy," Martha said later when she and Violet were alone with the baby. "More than happy. She looks content, settled." "I am so glad things worked out for you." "So am I, Mama. It was scary at first, marrying a stranger and moving so far from home. But Nathan is a good man, better than I could have hoped for, and I love him more than I thought possible." That is all a mother can wish for her child. Someone who treats them well and makes them happy. The visit lasted 2 weeks, and by the end of it, Henry Nolan had warmed considerably to Nathan. Violet heard them talking one evening, her father sharing stories about Violet as a child, Nathan listening intently and laughing at the right moments. When her parents left, there were tears but also promises to visit again and invitations for Violet's family to come to Carlin. As Henry grew into a toddler, curious and energetic, the small house began to feel cramped. Nathan and Jack discussed the possibility of building an addition, and the following spring, with help from the other ranch hands, they added 2 more rooms. Now, there was a proper separate bedroom for Henry and a larger living space. Violet loved having more room, loved that their home was growing along with their family. 2 years after Henry's birth, Violet found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. Their daughter was born in early winter, a tiny thing with her father's gray-blue eyes. They named her Elena Martha, after both grandmothers, and called her Ellie. Nathan was just as devoted to Ellie as he was to Henry, cradling his tiny daughter with infinite gentleness. "I never knew my heart could hold this much," he said, watching Ellie sleep in his arms while Henry played at his feet. Violet looked at her little family and felt a contentment so profound it almost hurt. This life she had stumbled into by accident had become more precious than anything she could have planned for herself. Nathan was not just her husband but her partner and best friend. Their children were healthy and happy. They had a home and a community, and a future that stretched out bright and full of promise. One evening, when Ellie was a few months old and Henry was 4, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The children were asleep inside, and it was one of those rare quiet moments. "You ever think about that day?" Nathan asked. "The day we met." "Sometimes," Violet admitted. "I think about how devastated I was standing in that church. I thought my life was ending." "It was ending," Nathan said. "Your old life, the one you had planned. But sometimes things have to end before something better can begin. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not walked into that church, if you had ridden right past Carlin, all the time? I would have made it to Wyoming eventually, would have worked here at the ranch. But I would have been alone. I would have lived my whole life alone, never knowing what I was missing. So yes, I think about it, and every time I do, I am grateful I was tired enough to stop and lean against those church doors." "I am grateful you were bold enough to offer what you did," Violet said. "It was crazy and impulsive and probably should not have worked out as well as it did. But it did work out. We made it work. We chose each other every day, even when it was difficult, and we built something real from what started as a practical arrangement." "I love you," Violet said, the words coming easily now after years of saying them. "I love you too. I always will." The years continued to roll by, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their children. Henry grew tall and strong, fascinated by the horses and cattle, following his father around whenever possible. Ellie was bright and curious, asking endless questions and bringing home wildflowers and interesting rocks. 2 more children joined the family, another son they named Samuel and a daughter they named Rose. The house was expanded again, now a proper farmhouse with enough room for everyone. Nathan rose through the ranks at the ranch, becoming foreman when Jack decided to step back from the day-to-day operations. It meant more responsibility, but also more stability and a better income. They were able to save money and make plans for the future. Violet started a small business making dresses and selling them in Riverside, using her sewing skills to contribute to the family finances and give herself a creative outlet. They visited Carlin every few years, making the long journey so the children could know their grandparents. Henry and Martha Nolan were getting older, but were delighted to see their daughter so happy and their grandchildren so healthy. The town had changed since Violet left, new buildings going up, the population growing as the mines continued to produce. But Violet felt no nostalgia for it. Her life was in Wyoming now, with Nathan and their children, and the community they had become part of. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Violet with a beautiful bracelet he had commissioned from a jeweler in Cheyenne. It was silver, engraved with their initials and the date of their marriage. 10 years, he said, fastening it around her wrist. 10 years since I walked into that church and saw the woman who would change my life. 10 years since you saved me from humiliation and gave me a future I never could have imagined. We saved each other, Nathan corrected. I was lost before you, Violet. You gave me purpose and family and love. Everything good in my life started the day I met you. They celebrated with Sarah and Jack, who had become like family over the years, and with the other ranch families who were their closest friends. The children ran around playing games while the adults ate and talked and laughed. It was a simple celebration, but filled with joy and community. As the evening wound down and they walked home under the stars, their younger children asleep in their arms while Henry and Ellie walked ahead, Violet reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She thought about the girl she had been, standing heartbroken in that church, unable to see past her pain and embarrassment. She could never have predicted that her greatest humiliation would lead to her greatest happiness. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked, shifting Samuel's sleeping weight on his shoulder. "Just how strange life is, how one moment can change everything, how the worst day of my life led to the best years. Do you have any regrets?" "Not a single one." "Well, maybe I regret not falling in love with you faster. We wasted those first few months being so careful with each other." "We needed that time," Nathan said. "We needed to build trust before we could build love. There are no shortcuts to what we have." By the time their children were grown and starting families of their own, Nathan and Violet had become pillars of the ranch community. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses. Henry Nolan had passed away, and Martha had followed him a few years later. They had grieved together, supporting each other through the loss. Nathan had some gray in his hair now, and Violet had lines around her eyes from years of smiling. But they were healthy and active, still working hard and enjoying life. They had the privilege of watching their children grow into good adults, Henry taking over as ranch foreman when Nathan retired, Ellie teaching school in Riverside, Samuel working as a carpenter, and Rose helping Violet with the sewing business that had grown considerably over the years. Grandchildren began to arrive, and Nathan and Violet embraced their new roles with delight. They spoiled their grandchildren shamelessly, telling them stories and teaching them skills, and giving them the kind of unconditional love that grandparents specialize in. On a warm summer evening when they were both in their 60s, they sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. The house was quiet, just the two of them, the way it had been in the beginning. "We have had a good life," Violet said, reaching for Nathan's hand. "The best life," Nathan agreed, lacing his fingers through hers. The simple gold band she wore, the one that had belonged to her grandmother Alina, caught the last rays of sunlight. It had become part of her, a symbol of a promise made by a stranger that had been kept for over 40 years. "Do you ever think about Thomas Hartwell?" Nathan asked. It was a question he had never asked before. "Not really," Violet said honestly. "Sometimes I wonder what happened to him, if he ever regretted his decision, but mostly I am just grateful he did what he did. If he had shown up that day, I would have married him, and I would never have known you. I would never have had this life. So in a strange way, I am thankful to him for being a coward." That is a generous way to look at it. I am old enough now to have perspective. Everything that happened needed to happen to bring us here. I would not change a single thing, even the painful parts. As the sun set and the stars began to emerge, they sat together in comfortable silence. They had been married for over 40 years now, had built a life and raised a family and grown old together. What had started as an impulsive decision made in desperation had become the foundation of everything they held dear. Their story would be told and retold by their children and grandchildren, the romantic tale of how a cowboy walked into a church and married a woman he had never met before. It would become family legend, embellished and celebrated. But Nathan and Violet knew the real story was not just that dramatic moment, but all the quiet moments that followed. It was the years of choosing each other, of working through difficulties, of building trust and love and partnership. It was the ordinary miracle of two strangers becoming family. As they headed inside for the night, Nathan held the door for Violet, and she smiled up at him. His face was dear and familiar, mapped with the history of their life together. She remembered the young man he had been, dusty and uncertain but willing to take a chance. She saw the man he had become, steady and loving and true to his word in every way. "I love you, Nathan Cross," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you too, Violet Cross. I always will." They closed the door on the Wyoming night, shutting out the world and shutting in the warmth of the home they had built together. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of time, bearing witness to a love that had started by chance and endured through choice. It was not a perfect love story, but it was theirs, and it was real, and it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The following years brought the inevitable challenges of aging. Nathan's back grew stiff from years of hard physical labor, and Violet's hands sometimes ached from decades of sewing. But they faced these difficulties together, adjusting their routines and supporting each other. Their children were attentive, making sure they had help with the more difficult tasks, but Nathan and Violet remained fiercely independent for as long as they could. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by 3 generations of family. The ranch community threw them a party that felt more like a homecoming, with people traveling from as far as California and Nevada to honor the couple. Stories were shared, toasts were made, and there was dancing under the summer stars. Nathan twirled Violet around the dance floor with surprising grace for a man in his 70s, and she laughed with pure joy, feeling young again in his arms. 50 years, she said when they finally sat down to catch their breath. "We have been married for 50 years, Nathan." "Best 50 years of my life," he said, kissing her temple. "Here is to 50 more." Though they both knew 50 more years was unlikely, the sentiment was genuine. They would take whatever time they had left and fill it with love and family and all the small pleasures that made life worth living. As Nathan's 80th birthday approached, his health began to decline more noticeably. He grew tired more easily, his appetite diminished, and there were days when he preferred to stay in bed rather than rise with the sun as he had done his entire life. Violet nursed him through it, sitting by his bedside and reading to him, holding his hand and talking about their life together. Their children took turns visiting, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren to brighten his days. One afternoon in late autumn, with the leaves turning gold outside their window, Nathan asked Violet to lie down beside him. She settled carefully on the bed, tucking herself against his side as she had done thousands of times before. "I need to tell you something," Nathan said, his voice weak but clear. "What is it, my love? I am not afraid of dying because I have lived a full life, but I am afraid of leaving you. The thought of you being alone breaks my heart." Violet felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I will not be alone. We have our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Your love will surround me every day through them. Promise me you will keep living. Really living, not just going through the motions. You have always been so full of life, and I need to know that you will stay that way." "I promise," Violet whispered. "But I need you to know something too. You gave me the most beautiful life. You kept every promise you made to me in that church. You were the best husband, the best father, the best man I have ever known. I am so grateful I got to spend my life with you." Nathan smiled, his eyes growing heavy. "That day I walked into that church was the luckiest day of my life. I saw you standing there and something in me just knew you were important. I did not know you would become my whole world, but I am so glad you did." They lay together as the afternoon light faded, talking quietly about their favorite memories. They laughed about Henry's first attempts to ride a horse, about Ellie's endless questions, about the time Samuel accidentally painted the barn the wrong color, about Rose's beautiful wedding day. They remembered summers and winters, joys and sorrows, all the moments big and small that had made up their life together. Nathan passed away peacefully that night, with Violet holding his hand and their children gathered around. He slipped away so quietly that at first Violet did not realize he was gone. When she finally understood, she pressed a kiss to his forehead and whispered one last time, "I love you." The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county. Nathan had touched so many lives during his years at the ranch, had been a friend and mentor to countless people. They shared stories about his kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength. Violet listened to it all, proud of the man her husband had been, grateful that others had seen in him what she had seen. The months after Nathan's death were difficult. Violet had lost her partner of 53 years, and the house felt empty without him. But she kept her promise to keep living. She continued her sewing, spent time with her family, and remained active in the community. She found comfort in the rituals of her life and in the memories that surrounded her in every corner of their home. On what would have been their 55th anniversary, Violet sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as she and Nathan had done so many times. Their son Henry came out and sat beside her, his own hair graying now. "How are you doing, Mama?" he asked gently. "I miss him every day," Violet said honestly, "but I am also grateful for every single day we had together. Not everyone gets to experience the kind of love we shared. Will you tell me again how you met? The real story, not the legend." Violet smiled. She had told this story many times, but it never grew old. "Your father walked into a church where I was being stood up at the altar. I was devastated and humiliated, and he was just a stranger passing through town. But he saw me standing there, and instead of walking away like any sensible person would have, he offered to marry me himself. It was the craziest, most impulsive thing either of us ever did. You think he planned it, like maybe he had been looking for a wife. No, I truly think it was pure impulse. He saw someone in trouble and wanted to help. That was just who he was. But I also think fate played a role. We were meant to find each other, even if it took such a strange path to make it happen. He loved you so much, Mama. We all saw it. The way he looked at you never changed in all the years I knew him. I loved him just as much. He was my great, unexpected blessing." Violet lived for another 7 years after Nathan's passing, long enough to see several more great-grandchildren born, long enough to celebrate her 90th birthday. She remained sharp and engaged with life until the very end, her wit and warmth undimmed by age. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep, she was surrounded by family and love, just as Nathan had been. They buried her beside Nathan on a hill overlooking the ranch they had called home for most of their lives. The headstone was simple, marking their names, birth and death dates, and a single inscription: "Two strangers who became everything." Their great-granddaughter, a young woman named Violet in honor of her great-grandmother, stood at the grave after everyone else had left. She touched the headstone gently, thinking about the story she had heard so many times. How strange and wonderful it was that a chance meeting in a church in Nevada had led to this large, loving family. How two people who had every reason to fail had instead built something that lasted and grew and touched so many lives. The sun was setting over the Wyoming hills, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Somewhere nearby, cattle lowed and horses whinnied, the eternal sounds of ranch life. Young Violet thought about her great-grandparents, imagining them young and uncertain, making a leap of faith that changed everything. She thought about the courage it took to marry a stranger, to build a life from nothing, to choose love day after day for over 50 years. It gave her hope for her own future, knowing that she came from such strong, brave stock. That sometimes the best things in life were unplanned. That love could grow in the most unexpected places. That keeping your word and treating people right really did matter. These were the lessons Nathan and Violet had left behind, not just in stories but in the very fabric of the family they had created. As the last light faded from the sky, young Violet turned and walked back toward the house, the same house that her great-grandparents had expanded and lived in, where generations of their family had been raised. It was full now of cousins and aunts and uncles, all gathered to remember and celebrate the woman they had lost but would never forget. Inside, someone was telling the story again, of how a cowboy walked into a church and changed everything. There was laughter and tears, the kind that comes from hearing a beloved story told well. Young Violet slipped into the room and found a seat, ready to hear once more about the day her great-grandfather Nathan saw her great-grandmother Violet standing at the altar, and instead of walking away, stepped forward and said, "I will marry her." It was a story of courage and chance, of heartbreak transformed into hope, of strangers becoming soulmates. It was a love story for the ages, made all the more powerful because it was true. And it would be told and retold for generations to come. A reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just doorways to something beautiful, if only we are brave enough to walk through them. The story of Nathan and Violet Cross lived on in their descendants, in the ranch that still operated under the care of their great-grandchildren, in the small town of Riverside where Violet's sewing business had grown into a thriving shop run by her granddaughters, in the memories of a community that had been blessed by their presence. They had lived fully and loved deeply, and in the end, that was all that mattered. That was the legacy they left behind, more valuable than land or money or fame. They left behind the knowledge that love, real and lasting love, was possible. That promises made should be promises kept. That family was built through choice as much as blood. That a life well lived was measured not in years but in moments, in the people you touched and the love you gave and received. And so the story ends where it began, in a small church in Carlin, Nevada, where a heartbroken woman stood alone until a stranger walked through the door and offered her the world. They built that world together, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice, and it was beautiful.